The toilet bowl, that is the toilet standing in the middle of the road, wanted to avoid a collision with that toilet. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. I just recently remembered this case when I heard about the new bill project called Lex Charlatan. That's what it's called, and it's aimed at those people who pretend to have some medical knowledge, who pretend to treat people. I didn't even suspect that there are thousands of these people. The same goes for institutions, really. Of course, they're causing harm, and there are supposed to be severe penalties for that, and that's the basis for this project. It reminded me that there's a story from the eastern part of Poland, so to speak, which relates a bit to such charlatans. It relates to superstitions. In the past, superstitions had their own power. People were simply afraid of that word, afraid of being connected to religion, afraid of some supernatural forces. Well, today when someone says superstitions, they immediately add that it's just old wives' tales. It's a bit funny, and basically modern people don't pay attention to something like superstitions. But this will also be an episode about what kind of tasks police officers have to deal with in other regions of Poland. I invite you to watch the next episode. All of this is happening around Hajnówka, a beautiful region of Poland. Some people say that time has simply stopped there. Hajnówka, located about 60 kilometers from Białystok, is also an enclave of Belarusian people. People who, I would say, live traditionally. There are very, I would say, conservative religious values there. Hajnówka is also known as a gateway or a window to the beauty of nature, because everything that surrounds Hajnówka when it comes to nature is truly beautiful. I would also say that basically not much happens there on a daily basis. Life in Hajnówka goes on very peacefully. However, for those who know, drinks like Duch Puszczy or Kres Księżycówka are quite popular there. Those in the know probably understand what that is. For those who don't, these are very popular names for very strong moonshine there. Those who have tried it know that this moonshine doesn't just knock you off your feet, it doesn't let you get up. So that's also a characteristic of this region. But the story that happened there, I think, is a story that it makes you wonder whether some things really happen that way in reality, or if they only happen because that's simply how we look at them. And of course, because of the Belarusian population, there are a lot of Orthodox churches there, some even listed as historic monuments. On May 2nd, 2009, Father Tomasz, well, I'd say the more popular name is Batyushka, since he's an Orthodox priest, was driving his car back from a friend's place. In the car were also his wife and children, 7-year-old Anya and little 3-year-old Oleg. It was already after 10 post-meridium in May, but at 10 post-meridium it's already dark. Because there were a lot of potholes on the road, Father Tomasz was driving more in the middle of the road. When he came out of the curve, he suddenly saw something. Well, that something was simply a toilet bowl standing in the middle of the road. He wanted to avoid hitting that toilet bowl, so he swerved sharply, couldn't stop in time, and crashed into a tree. Father Tomasz Lewczuk was born on January 20th, 1971, and he comes from Hajnówka, from these towns. He lives in this community. Back then, Hajnówka had about the same number of people as now, around 22,000. It's also notable that there are many people there who live past 100 years old, so this region is considered to have a very long-lived population. I would say as a child, as a boy, he was very smart. He finished primary and secondary school, then he chose the path of a clergyman, the path of a priest. First, he graduated from the Orthodox Higher Theological Seminary in Warsaw. Then he went to study in Slovakia, where he studied in Prešov, and in 1996 he returned to Poland with a diploma in hand. Then began the path that I would say is typical for an Orthodox priest. First, he received his diaconal ordination at the Cathedral of Maria Magdalena in Warsaw, and then later his priestly ordination, the year 2008, and he becomes a priest, returns to his home, lives among these people, and I would say he is the kind of priest who is well liked because he is one of their own. He is liked by other priests and he is liked by the parishioners. He also takes an active part in everything that is happening. There is even an event called the Days of Church Music, which is probably well known. A lot of people go there, so he also takes part in preparing for this music event. Father Tomasz was a vicar at the Holy Trinity Parish in Hajnówka, and on that day, on May 2nd, when he lost control of the steering wheel, as I told you, he hit a tree. The force of the impact was very strong, but in fact it was Father Tomasz who suffered very serious injuries. His wife, 34-year-old Ania Olkowi, was basically unharmed. They were in the hospital, but they were released very quickly. Did anyone even notice that? Someone reported the accident to the ambulance service, which is why the ambulance arrived quite quickly. Unfortunately, the condition of Father Tomasz, who was fighting for his life, and the doctors were also doing what they could, was getting worse. There were also some problems with his spine, and unfortunately, after a week, Father Tomasz Lewczuk passed away. He was 38 years old at the time, and he was a priest who didn't have much experience because, as I said, he had only become a priest a year earlier. For the people who lived there, it was a shock. They lost a priest they liked who gave great sermons. They spoke about him in the highest terms, a wonderful, wise priest who came from their own community. Well, of course, the police started an investigation. It was clear that the cause of the accident was that unfortunate toilet that was standing in the middle. The police arrived, a group of officers from the traffic department, and they started the inspection. But when they started examining the toilet, it was clear that it was some kind of old toilet. Right away, the assumption was that someone had renovated their bathroom, threw out the old toilet, and installed a new one. So you have to look primarily among those who recently did such a renovation, but in that toilet, in the middle of the traffic police station by the road, there was something else. Well, inside there was a glove. It was immediately obvious at first glance that this glove was heavily stained with blood. So it couldn't have been a coincidence that someone put this bloody glove right inside the toilet. At first it was thought that maybe it was animal blood, but nothing like that. It was human blood. Here they managed to extract a DNA code, and it was clear that it was human blood, but they just didn't know who the blood belonged to. Of course, the police primarily accepted that as their first version, that it was some kind of stupid prank, that maybe a group of young people who lived there were involved. Nearby, on the way home, she saw that toilet, put it in the middle of the road, thinking it would be a silly prank. But it ended in tragedy. That seemed the most likely, and the police followed that lead, driving around, searching, asking where and who had recently done renovations. That's important. The criminal division of the Hajnówka police headquarters also got involved in these findings, as did the prosecutor's office. They wanted to find out who did it at all costs. But a month and a half passed, there was no sign, and only after 6 weeks did a clue appear. Of course, during those 6 weeks, the media were very interested in everything that happened. Well, mainly because of Father Tomasz, but also because of the circumstances of the accident. Well, that toilet, it might seem like a grotesque situation, but it was very tragic in its consequences. So journalists wrote about that toilet and photos were published. And after those 6 weeks, he shows up at the police station in Hajnówka. Mr. Stefan lives in a neighboring town, and he says that that toilet bowl belongs to him. And in fact, he was renovating his house. He dismantled that old toilet. But you know how it is on a farm? He thought it might still come in handy for something, but he didn't leave it at his place. He took it to his parents' house. And so that toilet was there at his parents' place. It was there for a while until one evening or night it just disappeared. Well, everyone was a bit surprised because it was just an old toilet, nothing else was missing, so who would want something like that? Well, maybe someone just needed it. They didn't really pay much attention to it. It was a small loss, so they didn't report it anywhere. But now, when Mr. Stefan saw that his toilet was used this way, he said, and there was something else that completely shocked the police officers. He said that the toilet was actually supposed to be used against him, that it was used for a certain magical ritual involving black magic, and that he is convinced this ritual was ordered from a whisperer. So that he would suffer some kind of harm, that it's obvious, that it had to be this way, of course. As a rule, he knows that whisperers are people who help others heal. Usually they are women, but there are also men who help through prayer. But he knows that such a whisperer also has magical knowledge of black magic, and that you can order a ritual from her if you want to harm someone. He even had two candidates for who could have been the people who wanted to harm him. These two suspects or candidates for suspects, according to Mr. Stefan, they are his two sisters, Anna and Eugenia. He said that his sisters are malicious and vindictive, that they wish him ill. And that's because he made money, built a house, and is doing well, and that's why being so malicious. They ordered this ritual, a magical ritual, to harm him. Well, maybe in other regions of Poland this would be one of the possible versions, that the priest became an accidental victim of such a magical ritual. But on the other hand, there in those towns, the police took it with deadly seriousness and started following that lead. Did some local whisperer really have nothing to do with all of this? Of course, the first thing they did was go to those two sisters, Anna and Eugenia, and they immediately said that, to put it mildly, they don't have much love for their brother. But he deserves it, because when their uncle died 8 years earlier, he took the entire funeral allowance, and then, when their parents died without leaving a will, he didn't want to share anything with them. He wanted to grab as much as possible for himself, and they couldn't get along with him. As a result, this conflict is ongoing, and most often everyone ends up in court so the judge can decide what belongs to whom. It was clear from this that the siblings were deeply divided, and Mr. Stefan insisted that it was his sisters who ordered this magical ritual, and the sisters admitted that yes, they don't like their brother. But there's absolutely no question of such a ritual. They absolutely did not order such a ceremony and have no knowledge of it whatsoever. As proof of this, they even agreed to take a polygraph test. In fact, the expert who examined them concluded that they probably have nothing to do with the case. They were also tested for blood type and DNA, so by comparing the blood that was secured during the inspection of the toilet bowl, well, logically, it seemed that it should have been Mr. Stefan's blood, because that was probably the most likely assumption. but it turned out that it wasn't Mr. Stefan's blood either. The police officers started searching, and it was mainly the officers from the criminal division who did it. Why am I mentioning these officers from the criminal division for the second time? Because, well, this will have a certain significance later in this story. They were making profiles, talking to people, finding out who deals with these kinds of things. Well, it turned out that in the region, in the area, there are at least a few of these whisperers. However, here the traces seem to lead to a whisperer named Hannah. And they said why they came, that there is a situation where someone ordered such a magical ritual. And to put it bluntly, they somehow suspected this whisperer Hannah, but she didn't want to say much. She kept making the sign of the cross, swearing she had nothing to do with it. Her husband finally got angry and kicked the police officers out, although kicked out is a rather gentle word. So they left empty-handed, but again they wanted to fulfill all the formalities here. The police also gave a polygraph test to the whisperer Hannah, but again the expert determined that the whisperer probably had nothing to do with what happened. The neighbors also gave this whisperer Hannah a good opinion. They said she is a good woman, she doesn't take any money for helping, she prays, she's a true Christian, so they absolutely can't say a bad word about her. Well, it seemed that at that time this story with the whisperer, this version seems plausible, but in a way that's impossible to prove. The police go back to the version that it was a group of local boys coming back from somewhere, that they were probably under the influence of alcohol, and that as a prank, as a joke, they moved the toilet to the middle of the road. Well, this version was kind of confirmed by a certain lady who, as it turned out, had driven down that road a moment before Father Luchuk's accident. She saw that. The toilet was standing on the roadside, which would mean that a moment later someone took it and placed it in the middle of the road. Well, the police once again did, I would say, a huge amount of work here. They even identified a group of local youths and determined where there was a party at that time. But after the interrogations, again, nothing came out of it. It couldn't be ruled out that the person who did it was simply alone, and when he realized what he had done, that a man had died because of him, and that it was a priest, he just got scared and stayed silent. Well, that was also a plausible version, but again, it was a version that couldn't be either disproved or confirmed. However, this story was constantly being described in the media, and the media got involved in it. The media really like these kinds of stories where there's a hint of black magic, where there are these kinds of atmospheres that usually can't be explained by reason. Although the accident itself could of course be explained, this story had already taken on a life of its own. There was a lot of talk about black magic, about all kinds of supernatural forces at work, and all of this reached Bishop Golicki. He personally knew Father Tomasz and decided to get involved, to take action, so he came to Hajnówka and also to Zamboni. To put it bluntly, he also thundered at the faithful. As he said, they consider themselves Orthodox Christians, but they believe in these kinds of superstitions, they believe in these kinds of charms, even though the church says it's a sin. But they think they know better and believe that all these rituals, the help from whisperers, have a greater, stronger effect than prayer in church. In the end, the bishop said they should stop talking, stop speculating about this, and stop spreading nonsense that Father Tomasz Luchuk was killed by the devil, but that people here are not without blame either. Well, of course, there was a lot of work for the police officers from Hajnówka and the prosecutors from Hajnówka, especially prosecutor Andrzej Rusko, that's his name. He got involved in this case for a reason. This 46-year-old prosecutor was the cousin of Father Tomasz, so he personally cared about solving this case. He knew Tomek, liked him, they were closely related. He did what he could, and Prosecutor Rusko was always against closing the case or putting it away in the archives. And even though he was a practicing, believing man himself, he did not dismiss and was even a supporter of the idea that behind everything that happened there was some kind of magical ritual. And he did not rule out that someone who performed such a ritual could be behind his cousin's death. Well, despite the profession he practiced, which should have made him a level-headed man, he still did not rule any of this out. And the second person, this time a police officer from Hajnówka, a detective from the criminal division, which is the department that conducts all kinds of investigations. They look for witnesses, identify potential suspects, they determine who did what, and they talk to people. Well, in this department, the leading figure was Deputy Inspector Mikhail Kazimieruk, a 39-year-old police officer. He eventually became the head of this department. And both gentlemen, Officer Kazimieruk and Prosecutor Rusko, worked together all the time, setting the tone for this case in some way. And basically, well, the case was discontinued. They accepted the version that probably someone just played a stupid prank and the case could be closed. But something else happened as well. First, on February 27, 2016, Deputy Inspector Mikhail Kazimieruk, this is the police officer from the criminal department who was conducting the investigation. He is driving his private car near Hajnówka while off duty, and his friend is with him. Near the village of Jagodniki, they suddenly lose control of the car, hit a tree, and Deputy Inspector Kazimieruk dies on the spot. This is February 27, 2016, almost a month later, when another tragedy occurs. Well, almost a month later, just before March 18, 2016, Prosecutor Andrzej Rusko is driving his private car. Do you remember? Father Levchuk's cousin is driving the same route that his cousin took 7 years earlier from Bielsk-Podlaski to Hajnówka. At the level of somewhere near the village of Holodini, the weather suddenly gets worse and the wind picks up. When he passes by one of the trees, that tree breaks and under its own weight hits another tree. A branch breaks off, a huge one, from that second tree. And with tremendous force and impact, it hits Prosecutor Rusko's car. Prosecutor Rusko dies on the spot. Well, an astonishing coincidence. Probably each of these accidents has been explained as circumstances, bad luck, coincidence, sometimes a lack of proper caution. From a human point of view, everything can be explained. Exactly, from a human point of view, everything can be explained logically. Yes, but as you can see yourselves, it's an extraordinary coincidence. People die at the moment when they get involved in the case and try to explain the mysterious and puzzling death of Father Tomasz Luchuk. I'll leave you with your thoughts. Of course, we can't explain whether to believe in superstitions or not. So answer that question for yourselves. Maybe, as some people say, there are things that philosophers haven't even dreamed of, and that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to us and of course take care.